On this week's Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, more season previews. Today, we're going to take a trio of Atlantic Division teams, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Ottawa Senators. That's all coming up on the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome inside the September 20th edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me 5 days a week over at Locked On Senators, and I'm alongside David Morassutti from Locked On Maple Leafs. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, which provides you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat over 50 infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's J-A-S-E medical.com. A reminder that you can like and subscribe to Locked On NHL wherever you download your podcast. We are free and available on YouTube. We also have local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week, wherever your favorite team plays. Know that you have a Locked On expert there discussing everything about your team. Season previews coming soon. Lots to get to on Locked On NHL. And today we decided a trio of teams. Well, naturally, as a Battle of Ontario, we're going to do the Leafs and Senators together. And the Tampa Bay Lightning are in the news today. David Morassutti, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing all right, but usually these media days aren't too bombshell. Like there's a few things that come out, but I didn't expect it to be as busy as it ended up being today. Let's just say it was one of the more revealing media days I've seen in quite a little bit.
Before we get to what the captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning is saying, we'll do that in our intro or in our season preview for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Again, they're going to be individual season previews with each host of each team, but we're going to do more of an overview of what changed from last season. We also have some stick taps to give out. No surprise at all. Brad Marchand has been named captain of the Boston Bruins. My one question, though, as a fan, both of us, of teams that Brad Marchand has annoyed, is there any part of you that thinks he might change the way he plays, or he knows what's made him successful, whether there's a C on his chest or not?
If Brad Marchand changes the way he acts and the way he plays, then he shouldn't be in the league anymore. Like what has made him Brad Marchand is what he does on the ice and off the ice. I mean, that's what made him the choice as captain. And it's funny because it's a totally different direction of the Patrice Bergeron, who's kind of the quieter, more cerebral type of leader.
It was like having the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other.
Exactly, right? Personally, I initially thought Charlie McAvoy was going to be the next captain because he is the team's future in terms of their top player, franchise defenseman. But then, the Brad Marchand makes sense because McAvoy doesn't have to deal with that pressure. I feel like Marchand thrives in that environment. He just loves it. And he just takes the team under his wing, right? When Marchand when Bergeron hasn't been healthy, it's Brad Marchand that leads this team, right? It's not really, I don't see anyone else taking that leadership mantle to that degree than Brad Marchand does.
So we will have plenty of time with Ian McLaren and Locked On Bruins to discuss the Brad Marchand captaincy, but we're going to go to another captain, Steve Stamkos. And let me begin with what Steve Stamkos had to say. And he's just very disappointed, I think, is the emotion that he was trying to get across. Stamkos going into the final year of his contract. He's the captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the exact quote is that he is disappointed in the lack of talk in the regard of a contract extension. It was something that he expressed at the end of last year that he wanted to get something done before training camp. And then the follow-up said, is it okay to discuss during the season? He says, quote, I'm ready whenever, so I guess that was something that I didn't see coming, but it is what it is. Quote, like I stated at the end of last year too, I would love to extend and play here and finish up my career here, but that's out of my hands. I can't write a contract for myself. What was your immediate reaction, David, when you heard the captain, the 2-time Stanley Cup champion, captain of the Lightning, say that?
Well, at first it was like disappointment for Stamkos, right? Like there was zero disappointment for the Lightning on my end. Like I'm never gonna be disappointed about
Ooh.
like boo freaking who. But I felt bad for Stamkos because we all remember that this is not the first time he's had to go outside to look for a contract and maybe look for a little bit of a better pay raise, right? We remember that meeting he took in Toronto, and Toronto had all the big bidders lined in. They're going to give him a rich deal.
Wasn't the CEO of Canadian Tire there?
He was there, yeah. So they were going to, really cater to the, hometown guy coming home. And then he decided he wanted to go back to Tampa. And he took that, 8-year deal, and he took less money than many thought he should have been given, right? And then Victor Hedman kind of follows suit next on that one. And this is where everybody who says, oh, look what he's done for the team, taking less money so they can build championships, that's good. And then when it comes to now getting another deal and, really cementing his legacy of being a Lightning forever, he's now feeling like the team didn't recognize what that loyalty and that sacrifice he put for him, which is why I feel like when players do that, the teams are never always going to reciprocate that because there's a business end to this. And look, Stamkos, great player. I don't know what he's looking for in terms of a contract. I don't think he's looking for a whole heck of a lot just because the Lightning do not have a lot to offer because they've been giving everybody 8-year deals on that team. But that's why I feel bad for Stamkos because he's the one that made the initial sacrifice and everybody lauded him for it until now it comes time where he's looking for a deal and he's like looking for scraps.
We should say he's $500,000 away from making $100 million in his career. It's not like he's, pressed for change. I think it's a matter of the respect of saying, hey, you're not even going to negotiate. You're not even going to ask me like, hey, what can we do? Can we have a 2-year extension? And I don't know. I'll just throw out a number. How about $5 million a year? That's a $3.5 million pay cut. His salary going into this final season is $6.5 million. The AAV upwards at 8.5. But when you look at what he brings, yeah, it's a lot of power play at this point in his career, but still over a point per game. Heck, he's one season removed from 106 points and 19 points, 11 goals in 23 playoff games. He's still a heck of a player, an even better leader. But as you mentioned, things change. Steve Yzerman, who signed him to that contract, is no longer in Tampa. So he's in a world now where Julian Breezeball is the GM, and Julian Breezeball spoke after Steven Stamkos today. Direct quote, Steven and I share the common goal of bringing a cup back to Tampa. Aside, that's pretty rude, guys. You already have 2 there. Can we share?
Yeah, exactly.
Back to normal. Quote, that's our objective. In order for us to do that in future years, we're going to need to spend our cap dollars wisely. In order for me to do that, I feel like I need to gather more information. I need to see how this season plays out. I need to see how the pieces of the puzzle fit this year. I need to see who steps up and who's able to handle a bigger role. I need to see how the team performs, and after the season, I will gather that information, and I'll be in a better position to have a clearer picture of what our puzzle looks like going forward, what our roster needs might be, and then how we allocate our cap space in order to build the best roster possible, not only for Steven to remain with the Lightning, but for us to stay Stanley Cup contenders year in, year out for the remainder of his tenure with us and hopefully bring the cup back to Tampa. Now, David, this is all great, dandy. Okay. This is the same team that has given 7 or 8-year contracts to Nick Paul, to Brandon Hagel, Eric Chernak. Like, I'm not even mentioning Braden Point, who definitely makes sense to give that to. I'm not even saying for Anthony Cirelli or Mikhail Sergachev. They are giving out 7-year contracts at decently high AAVs to players who have just been brought in. Nick Paul was brought in after the last Stanley Cup. Like, they have no history, and I get it. It's a business. It's a business, but that was a shocking revelation where it's like, hey, let's see where we're at the end of the year. It's like, well, you didn't need to do that for all these other guys. Just feels like the wrong guy to be picking this line in the sand with.
Exactly. And we know why they gave these long-term deals to these players, because they wanted to keep the AAVs down. Right. There's no way Nick Paul should have been given that much of a commitment, right? There's no way they should have been giving, Eric Chernak. I understand the roles these guys play in. They're here for a long time, not making a whole lot of money, but they're still making significant dollars over a long period of time. And yeah, you're right. It feels like they were the priorities, I guess, their age and all that. I get all that. Stamkos hasn't exactly been the banner of health, but he's also been such a key player for you for so many years. You just said he was a 100-point player not too long ago. You don't get to the playoffs without those guys performing for you, right? So it does feel like they gave all these deals out, and then they probably just expected Stamkos to just fall in line with what they wanted. And that to me is also the problem too, is that they expect the players to show loyalty, and then when it comes to them wanting something, but we have the rest of the team to look after.
Okay.
Like, he already gave them their solid the first time around. And look, I don't think he's looking for over $10 million either, right? We've seen players end of their careers. I look at like Malkin is a perfect example. Somebody who wanted to stay in Pittsburgh, didn't look like he was going to stay in Pittsburgh because they weren't making a contract with him a priority. And he ends up taking, a pretty reasonable deal for what he provides them.
So the Tampa Bay Lightning, their biggest offseason move in terms of acquisition was Connor Sherry. They obviously made their big splash at last year's deadline. Tanner Jeannot, who they have for 2 more years at $2.665. They re-signed Brandon Hagel to a long-term extension that doesn't kick in this year, but after this year at $6.5 annually, all the way through the end of the 2031-32 season. So we'll see how that ages. Pat Maroon is out. He's up in Minnesota now. They send Ross Colton to Colorado, where he signs a big 4-year ticket. And they bring in Jonas Johansson, who hasn't had great numbers, but heck, as long as you can play 5 games, you should be good behind Andrei Vasilevsky. To me, they're a Stanley Cup contender as long as Andrei Vasilevsky is playing at this level. So we'll see, because time will tell. Lots of offseason changes. And the title of this episode, at least the thumbnail, David, is Trouble in Paradise, ? With Steven Stamkos. So we'll see how that all plays out. Coming up next, we've got the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Ottawa Senators to get to. You're listening to the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Now, the Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jace case is filling out a simple online form and, in some cases, jumping on a quick call with one of their board-certified physicians. So get ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment-related questions. It's doctor-created. It's doctor-recommended. You can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. Jace Medical is simple. Just go online, fill out the form, and then you get your prescription right to your door. So go to jacemedical.com, promo code LOCKEDON. That's JASE medical.com. Jace Medical. Welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day. We got local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week. And who better to get the Battle of Ontario brewing than myself, Ross Levitan from Locked On Senators, and David Morassutti from Locked On Maple Leafs. You know what? I have to tip my cap. The Maple Leafs clearly doesn't take an expert to tell you they're the better team over the last 5 years. Although I will say, David, it feels like the head-to-head is probably about 500. I've had the Sens and Leafs. They always get in the mix in the regular season.
They do, until only one of them makes the playoffs.
I'm curious to see, what do you think their record is head-to-head over the last couple of years? Last year, it was 2 wins each. So there you have it.
I think maybe the Leafs might have a couple of wins just because end of the season, the Senators hadn't always been in, winning.
There was that great shootout game where they went, I think, 12 rounds in the shootout. Matt Murray stole that game for Toronto.
Yeah, so there's games like that where I feel like the Leafs have picked up wins. I know Ottawa's usually better playing in Toronto, and Toronto's usually better playing in Ottawa.
Yeah, because there was that one game. What was it? It was 5-1 for the Leafs, and they lost that game?
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember that. No, but I will tip my cap. Let's do the Leafs first because obviously they're the Stanley Cup contender. I just want my Senators to make the playoffs, for crying out loud. So with that said, what is the main storyline for you with the Toronto Maple Leafs now going into this season?
It's just how they plan to take their game to the next level, right? We know they're such a talented team, but we've just been shown that talent is not enough to get you through the grind of a Stanley Cup playoffs. You need to bring other elements. And that was Brad Treliving's biggest goal this offseason, was trying to add those elements. And for me, though, the one area I'm still not sure about, and I feel like that's something that's going to be addressed at some point this season, is the blue line. I feel like the blue line is going to be the biggest storyline just because the only addition they really made was John Klingberg. Yes, they brought in Jake McCabe last year in the trade deadline, and he had a contract past last season, so he's sticking around. There were question marks of whether TJ Brody was even going to be around going forward. So, like, that blue line to me is one that I'm not all too happy with, just because I've seen what type of blue line you need to be really good. It's not like the Leafs have an Andrei Vasilevsky in that. Ilya Samsonov was a good goalie. Joseph Woll performed admirably in the playoffs, but they don't have the Andrei Vasilevsky that's going to steal you games, even if your blue line is not off the par. They don't have the Sergei Bobrovsky that stole how many games for Florida last year, right? Like the Panthers' blue line is not very good, but it didn't matter because Vasilevsky played God mode for them.
He's that good, right? And that's what the Leafs are hoping to get here in Ilya Samsonov. And with that decor ahead of them, like, are you nervous about it? It feels like they've got some potential, but at the same time, they're going to be relying on some over 30 guys who are, decent, but you don't really know what you're going to get at this point with Mark Giordano. I mean, what a career he's had, but 39 years old. Like, can he be an everyday NHLer at this point? And then TJ Brody, I feel like for the last 2-3 years, people have been waiting for the shoe to drop, and wasn't the best playoffs for him, to say the least.
The one that concerns me is they don't necessarily have the cap space to bring in like 8 defensemen unless they decide to make some moves to alleviate some of the cap space, right? Like, that's the part of me I'm a little concerned about. Like, Giordano didn't have a good playoff, right? Because I feel like, the amount of ice time he played during the year caught up to him at the end. And he can't do that. You can't have him playing hard minutes. It's good he's not going to be playing top 4 this year. He's going to be in a reduced role. But we're not talking about reduced role. We're talking about he shouldn't even be playing as much as he played last year. And I feel like they're going to try to take some of those games off his hands, but they don't exactly, unless they're planning to make some shortcuts up front with their forwards and not have too many guys up front in terms of on the bench or up in the press box. They don't have a lot of space to say, hey, Mark, we can give you some games off. They might not even have defensemen able to step in and play if the way their salary cap is shaping out. Now, they have some time to fix that, but that's something that they got to really focus on between now and the start of the season.
Really looking forward to seeing what's new in Toronto this year, because it feels like, maybe they've gone too, like, how far is the pendulum going to swing the other way, where it was all skill under Kyle Dubas, and now what does Brad Treliving do? He gets 2 gritty, talented forwards, Tyler Bertuzzi more so than Max Domi, and then goes out and adds that grit, that sandpaper in Ryan Reeves. Like, is this something that the fans are welcoming? Do they want to be more in the mix maybe than they have been in years past? Because, I mean, when the Leafs were at their best early 2000s, heck, do I know it more than many? It was the Shane Corsons, the Darcy Tuckers, the Ty Domies, right? It was all these guys who made it a miserable experience playing against them night in, night out. And they frankly just hadn't had that in the last half decade.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement with the Max Domi one, obviously for the nostalgia factor, but this is also a player that's motivated to come and play in Toronto. There was a thought that he wants to make Toronto his permanent home going forward. So, he's got to really show out and he's got to play to that potential that the Leafs see in him. Bertuzzi's the one I really like the most because we know he can play in that top line role. Like, in that series against Florida for Boston, he had 10 points in 7 games. That is really good production, and Boston was obviously so close to knocking off Florida. I would have liked to have seen what Bertuzzi would have done on a longer playoff run. And then with Reeves, that one to me screams more about, they're going to throw him in the lineup in those games where teams are going to try to be the physical aggressors and try to get, I wouldn't say scare the Leafs, but make them uncomfortable. And Reeves is not going to let that happen. But to me, it's also the locker room. I think they've realized that they needed something in the locker room to change. Otherwise, they could have gone any guy that would provide that grinder fighter role. But they brought in Ryan Reeves because Ryan Reeves is a different character than a lot of other NHL players. There's not many like him in the NHL, and I feel like maybe that was done by design.
And we'll see what happens with the Toronto Maple Leafs. For more on the Leafs, go download, check out Locked On Maple Leafs with David Morassutti and Mike DiStefano. Coming up next on the Locked On NHL podcast, a quick season preview for the Ottawa Senators. Today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. It's the official sportsbook of Locked On. Right now, new customers are getting $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. I've been banging the drum on this. I hope to make everybody rich at FanDuel right now. I think even David Morassutti, known Senators hater, David Morassutti, might jump on board this one. Tim Stützle, 40 or more goals this season at plus 450 at FanDuel. Plus 450. Tim Stützle, 39 goals last year. Can he hit 40 this year? I've got my money there at FanDuel. So head over to FanDuel right now. Use the code LOCKEDON to kick off the NFL season as well. FanDuel, it's the official partner of the NFL. Visit FanDuel.com and include money lines, tips, props as what you do at FanDuel. All right, welcome back. Locked On NHL. Ross Levitan alongside David Morassutti here, breaking down three more teams in the Eastern Conference. Last week, we had New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Columbus, and now we're turning our attention to the Ottawa Senators. We're heading up the 401, up the 416, taking a right, getting downtown Ottawa. Oh, wait, then we got to turn around because the rink isn't even close to downtown. But the Ottawa Senators are hoping that their trajectory continues up. The team improved 13 points year over year from 2 years ago to last year, but missed the playoffs by 6 points. And I'm not one to blame injuries. But David, no Shabbat, no Chychrun, and no Norris for all season. It just felt like, the wheels fell off at the end of the season after so much excitement. They make that Jacob Chychrun trade. They win 5 games in a row. They were neck and neck. And what really, I think, breaks Sens fans' hearts is the fact that the team that slipped in ahead of them, that they were neck and neck battling with all regular season long, the Florida Panthers end up going all the way to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, I mean, for Ottawa, it just feels like they have the mix. They have the style play that would fare them well in the playoffs. It's just getting themselves there, whether it's goaltending, whether it's injuries, tough starts to the season. Like, there's just so many things that Ottawa feels like they have to overcome each and every year just to get themselves to the playoffs. And they're a team that I feel like if they get to the playoffs, they can be a tough out. Like, just like the Panthers, I feel like there are similarities between the two teams. Well,
they both have a Tkachuk.
Yeah, they both have the Tkachuk. Goaltending can be a hit or miss with both those teams. But yeah, Ottawa, and as a Leafs fan and somebody who grew up with those Battle of Ontario playoff series, like nothing got me more excited, especially when the Leafs were on the winning end of those, just to have that rivalry there. And especially in these Canadian markets, and especially Ottawa now with the excitement of the new ownership, hopefully a new rink to come along with that, and just a renewed excitement for this team, especially a team that looks like they're on the rise.
Yeah, it really feels that way, that the rebuild is over. I know it's been such a, overused cliche after Pierre Dorion said it probably 2 years too soon. And hey, how long was COVID? 2 years? No, I had joked. There's no excuse. Everybody dealt with it. But I really think, there's two things. One, goaltending wins championships, and Ottawa's taken 2 big swings to bring in a goalie, and they've both failed miserably. Matt Murray just did not work out on that 4-year deal. And that is still being felt there in Toronto, and the dead money that's been retained in that trade. And then Cam Talbot was just consistently inconsistent. and just did not provide enough stable goaltending to allow that. So Joonas Korpisalo, I mean, this is his team now, 5-year term, only a $4 million AAV, and he's coming off a brilliant season, both on a bad team in Columbus, and then he was even better in LA when he got traded there at the deadline. But before that, it was some pretty mediocre numbers for him throughout. Now, he got hip surgery, and it seems like he's 100% healthy and was all of last year. So you got to just hope that that's the case and to continue. And then Anton Forsberg coming back from 2 torn MCLs on the same play, like just an awful injury for him. So yeah, goaltending, number one for me. And then you mentioned it, man. These starts are unbelievably tough to overcome. When Ottawa, like last year, they lost the first 2 games of the season, then came home and rattled off 5 straight wins, or 4 straight wins, mind you. And then November comes and they just can't win games in November for whatever reason. So I think that there's a lot of hope around the new ownership and a lot of hope around the fact that the new owner's spending money on analytics. Ottawa hired its first full-time analytics member this summer. Like the Leafs have probably more analytics members in that department than the Senators have front office members. So it's great to see that kind of swaying and, using the technology and the numbers and the data and all that can help them get to the next level. But I like their offseason moves. I think Tarasenko is a nice pickup for a 1-year contract as well, and see if he can, I tweeted out, and David, maybe you can give me your take on Tarasenko after. I was like, projected numbers for Tarasenko, and I literally just copy and pasted Alex DeBrincat's numbers from last year, 27 goals, I think it was 35 assists, and then I put better than minus 31 because the defensive game there, and it's not all DeBrincat's fault because he was put in a situation where he was supposed to play with Norris or Stützle throughout the year. Norris goes down. He ends up playing with a 20-year-old rookie. Now, I'm pretty high on Shane Pinto, who at the time of this recording still needs a new contract, but that's a lot to ask for a 20-year-old to play top 6 minutes in the NHL, especially in the division where it's like you're Matthews and you have Tavares, right? When you're playing against Tampa, you have Point and Stamkos. You're going to go up against these tough matchups, but I do think that they're going to be better prepared this year. Health, goaltending, coaching are the 3 things that I'm going to look for the Senators.
Yeah, and I think with health especially, because we know Josh Norris's health has been kind of a question mark, and how much different the team is when he is healthy and he is playing. But when I look at the Tarasenko edition, like it's one where I say it can work if he is used the way he's supposed to be used in the right situation. We know, like with the trade to New York, that was that instant connection with Artemi Panarin, but it kind of dwindled a little bit. We know Tarasenko is not the same player as he used to be. A few surgeries and age kind of impact that a little bit. But I think in the right situation, he can be an offensive producer, especially, the power play hasn't really been Ottawa's issue. No. But I think 5-on-5 goal scoring, they're going to need some of that. And they're going to need someone that's able to create some of that offense for himself. And Tarasenko should be one that is able to do that. And I think he's a little underrated in terms of his playmaking ability and helping other guys as well as an offensive player.
I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder too, David, because he thought he was going to get that big deal on July 1st. He ended up having to change agents just to get any contract because it just did not work out the way that anyone in his camp had hoped. So whether it's a hired gun or if he signs a long-term, it's much like we talk about the Leafs with Bertuzzi and Domi. These 1-year contracts are show-me deals in a sense. You're playing for your next contract. So I'd heard some people say that Tarasenko, maybe a little more of a selfish hockey player, and I hope he is this year. I hope he just rips pucks on net, and if he's playing on Brady's line, he'll be standing at the net front and hopefully banging a few home. So because obviously I'm enthralled in it every day over at Locked On Senators, but are you feeling like this is a playoff team in Ottawa, or it's basically them, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, New York Islanders pick 2 in a sense?
Yeah, like the Atlantic Division is going to be really, really tough this year, unless one of the teams that we're at the top, whether it's Boston, Florida, Tampa, or Toronto. If one of those teams takes a step back, then there's a little bit of an opening there. But I think it's going to have to come through the wild card if those teams who have been at the top remain at the top. And that could be the issue with Ottawa and Buffalo. Detroit's a little bit better too. So there's not going to be as many easy wins on them. Obviously, Montreal, we know that they're not trying to win anytime soon. So that helps in that regard. But it's a really tough division, but I think Ottawa being so close last year gives them that belief that they can get there with the improvements that they made this offseason.
Oh, we will find out soon enough. We are oh so close to the NHL season. We're 3 weeks away from the Sens opener and less than 3 weeks before the 2023-24 season drops the puck. For more, go visit your local experts on their biggest stories at each and every Locked On show, from Locked On Maple Leafs to Locked On Senators, Locked On Lightning, and all the great shows across the Locked On NHL podcast network. For today, we say goodbye. For David Morassutti, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been the Locked On NHL podcast. We're talking Senators. I had to make the mistake. This has been the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day.